Hi everyone, we are in chapter 4. So now what we will do is I'm increasing my volume to make sure you guys can hear me. But for this particular chapter, we will delve into variables and arithmetic operations. So now your program is going to expand a bit. So far, from chapters 1 through 3, we've learned how to create GUIs, and we've gotten a feel of what the coding environment would look like, how to use our just basic assignment statements to have our images or our GUIs on our form to be visible, not visible, buttons to be enabled, not enabled, and those various things. But as we progress through the course, we will begin to have our programs do several different things. And one thing is for sure is retrieving input from the user. So when you think about a GUI, think about your window when you're getting ready to log into your Facebook, log into your Instagram, or sign in for your email and different things like that. You always have some type of window that allows you to input information, and it uses text boxes. And so what we'll do in this particular chapter is build a GUI that will allow the user to input data. So now you'll have data entry. And what happens is when the user inputs information in your form, your program has to process that information. So you have to write a program to use the appropriate syntax and programming guidelines for the language to make sure your program will process that data and basically produce whatever output you're wanting your program to produce. Okay. So what we're going to talk about in this particular chapter is we're going to focus on you being able to retrieve the data, differentiate the different types of data, and process it and use it and produce whatever it is that you want to do. So you can review the slides. I'm not going to go through each one. I just want to give you highlight a few things. But these are our objectives, things that we're going to kind of cover. In this particular video, we're just going to cover the meat of the chapter, which is data types, how to create variables, the operators that you'll use for calculations, and that is what we're going to focus on in this particular video. But what you'll do is you will make sure you watch the guided program video so that you can see it all in action. Okay, but the thing is, I want you to understand what you're creating. Okay, so this is the GUI that we will create. And what's going to happen, we're going to make sure, just a second, I'm trying to make sure you can see what I'm looking at. Hopefully you can see that. Okay, so you'll notice here, we will be using, creating a text box here. You'll see here, this is our text box, and I have a strong feeling that you can't see this, so give me a second. As you can see, I don't use, let's just do draw, and I can write on it. So as you will see here, we have a text box that we're going to create that will basically allow the user to input how many bikes they want to actually purchase. So you'll see here, I'm just going to use my mouse. So now I have this text box here that will allow the user to input a number. But what happens is your program you have to write your program to identify this information and process this information and produce this output. Okay, so what we're going to do is learn how to retrieve the information from the text box, store it, and process it, okay? Now, what we're going to do is create variables. Now, a variable is just basically a location in memory that where you're allocating space and you're going to store something there and you're going to use it for whatever reason you want to use it for. The key thing is making sure that you use the appropriate data type. So there are 8 different data types, primitive data types that you will learn in most of your languages, but most of the time you're only going to use a select few. For those of you who have taken other languages before, this is probably totally not new. But for those where this is your very first language, you're going to be introduced to the different types of, I think I have it in here, the different types of different data types that you could use. And your textbook has all of this. So these are some of the data types, but what we're going to do is we're going to focus on certain ones in particular. Okay, we're going to focus on integers, decimals. We're definitely going to use those. I really recommend reading through your book because your book gives more in-depth information. For me, I'm going to, and for this course, I'm going to give you the most important things that you will need, especially as we're progressing forward. As you're understanding the things that I introduce, you'll be better able to understand everything else pertaining to those different data types, okay? Now, the data types that we're going to look at are strings, which is basically can store any type of information. It can store numbers, it can store a single character, it can store a full sentence. So things like your full name or just your first name. If you have a sentence, I love Visual Basic. It'll store any text that you have, and it's always going to be recognized as text. Okay, it's not. So if I had a number, it wouldn't be recognized as the number 5 or the number 10. It would be recognized as just text. Okay. So we're going to talk about how you convert, but what I want you to think about is the text box that we were looking at here, that we're going to create on this GUI, where the user will enter the number 4. When the user enters anything inside of the text box, anytime something is entered inside of this text box, it is going to be retrieved and stored as a string, no matter what kind of text box. If you're asking for a number, or if you're asking for the person's name, it doesn't matter. Whatever is being placed inside of the text box, the language is set up to retrieve it and store it as a string, okay? So if you ask me for my name and I input Kimberly, it's gonna automatically store as a string, and you won't have to convert that because it is type. That's the type of information it is. However, if you ask me to enter how many bytes I want to rent, the number 4, that particular value is meant to be a number, but because the language stores it as a string, is going to retrieve it as a string from that text box, I would have to convert it to a number so I can use it. So if I want to calculate something, I want to multiply it times the cost of the bike or whatever the case may be, I have to convert it to a number before I can actually use it or do anything else, okay? So that's what we're going to focus on. So the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to come to my whiteboard here. Now, the different data types that we're going to focus on, let's move this. For this particular course, and feel free to take notes as we go, because I will have to erase certain things as we clear out the canvas and start over. And so make sure you take any notes that you feel the need to take note of. Also have your book next to you so that you can kind of go through with me, and maybe stop the video and look and read and different things like that to kind of help you, okay? So the data types that we're going to focus on: string, integer, that's a G. Char, C-H-A-R. Boolean, decimal, okay? These are the main ones we're going to focus on. Of course, there are others listed in your book, like I showed you on the slide: bytes, date, long, object, short, single. There are different other types that you can use, but these are the main ones that you're going to use for this particular language. For some of you who have taken Java with me, or maybe with some of the other professors, I'm not sure what they use, but I know we use doubles instead of decimal. But for the most part, if you've taken any other language, you've seen string, integer, char, and Boolean, okay? But for this particular language, these are the ones we're going to use. Now, again, string stores any, I'm just going to say anything, but as text. So it's going to be, it'll store anything. So numbers, single characters, sentences, text, whatever it is, it stores it as text. It's just going to be as is, no values. Integers are whole numbers or non-decimal numbers. And this pound with the S is just short for numbers, okay? All right, so integers, of course, is going to store whole numbers. So like the year 2020, 2020 will be stored as an integer. Your age will be stored as an integer, okay? It can store up to 2 billion. That's how, that's the size, okay? So numbers up to, it can count up to 2 billion. So it will store, we won't be using anything that large, but integers are for whole numbers and non-decimal numbers. So for example, in this particular GUI that we're creating, where the user has to enter the number of bytes, we will be storing that, we will want to store that value as a integer, but because they're entering it in the text box, it's going to be stored as a string first, and then we have to take it and retrieve that value and convert it to an integer, convert it to that number, to that value, so we can use it, okay? And I'm going to show you how to do that, but I just want you to understand how we're going to be processing all this data that we'll be retrieving from the user, okay? Char, C-H-A-R, are for single characters or symbols. All right, so any data where you're asking, maybe you ask them to enter a character like or a symbol, any one character will be stored as a char, okay? We don't use char, we're not going to use char a whole lot, but just to make sure that when you see it, and in some instances, if you think it's best to use a char, you can use a char, okay? Boolean stores 2 values, stores true or false, all right? So it's based on a condition. So if you guys recall, in the last chapter, we were looking at assignments, right? And so you've probably heard me say Boolean before, where we were setting the visible property to true. Yes, I want to make it visible. Or the enable the property to false. No, I don't want to be enabled. So that is an example of a Boolean type. So anything that is related to setting it to true or false, setting a condition or a circumstance or situation to true or false, that will be considered a Boolean, all right? In some instances, we'll be checking for certain things as we expand, like I think it's like chapter 5 or 6, where we start retrieving information from the user, checking the information, and it's letting us know, it's validating, and it's going to send us true or false. So we're going to kind of work with some of those in later chapters, but just know that is what a Boolean is, okay? And then decimal. Decimal is going to deal with decimal values, okay? Anything that consists of a decimal. So like your GPA, the price of something, the cost of something, Maybe when you're doing your weight, you including the ounces and all of that. So you might want to include a decimal. So anything that consists of decimals will store. So now that you see what each type is, this should let you know what type you will need depending on the information that you're processing. So depending on if you're asking the user to enter the cost, or if you're calculating the cost yourself and you're going to create a variable to hold it, that's the type that you would use, would be a decimal. If you're doing name or full sentence, you would do a string. If you're doing whole numbers, you would do an integer, a single character, a char, or true or false, Boolean. So now you have to know what data type you have to use, because if you don't use the right data type, you will have an error in your program. Okay. Now, what happens is, I'm going to clear this out, so hopefully you've taken your notes. Now, what we're going to do is, now we're going to look at how we create variables. We have to allocate space. All right. So a variable is just basically, sorry. That's my alarm. My alarm set. Okay, sorry about that. So what we're gonna do now is look at creating a variable. So whatever type of data you're gonna be retrieving, you have to allocate space for it. You have to allocate space in the memory for it, and that's what your variable is going to be. So in order for you to store what the user is entering in the text box, and for you to retrieve it, you have to have a variable that's going to hold it. So you're going to have to make sure you're storing all this information that you're processing. Okay. Now, in order for you to create a variable, there is certain syntax that you have to use. So now we're going to create a variable to store the person's number of bytes, however many number of bytes that they're wanting to rent. Okay. So the syntax for declaring a variable, so let's just put declare here so you know the difference. All right. So here, dim, D-I-M. All right. So here you always begin your variable when you're getting ready to define your variable, which you're defining it, is letting it know what it's letting it know to enter the variable dimension. So now I'm defining this variable. Okay. So now dim, and then now you have to indicate a name. You have to give a name to that particular information that is going to hold the type of information. So in this case, we're going to basically store, let's just say, this is going to be our text box entry, the number of bytes. So let's just say number of bytes, even though it's going to be a string, because this is going to store whatever we're retrieving from the text box. But for all of your variables, you have to use an acronym. So for strings, it's str. For integer is int. So you always have to have some type of prefix in front of it to indicate the type of value or the type of data that will be stored there. So notice for the ones that we're going to be using: string, str, integer, int, decimal, dec, double, well, we're not going to use double, but if you wanted to use double, dbl, char, chr, boolean, bln, and these are all the remaining other types that so here in this case, we're going to use str. We're going to start with str. It's kind of weird writing on my tablet. All right. So dim str, and then the name of the variable. So let's just say number of bytes. No, there are no spaces here. It's all one word. And this is NUM. Okay. All right. This is the variable name. All right. So this variable name. Okay. The next portion, as, capital A there. Okay. And then now you have to indicate the type. And so we know by the str that it's going to be string. So now you've declared a variable. This is declaring a variable. You haven't stored anything there. You've just allocated space for information, for data of type string. All right. So most of the time when you're in the coding window, and when you're declaring, it's going to have a green squiggly line under it, which means nothing's been stored there. It has not been initialized yet. Okay. So that is what that means if you see the green squiggly line. Okay. So make sure that it doesn't throw you for any reason. Okay. All right. So let's erase. Okay, I think that's my other window. All right. So let's just clear it out. That's fine. All right. So now, and I need to write it better. All right. So now let's just here and and something you will notice, camel case. So you want to make sure it's readable. So str is always lowercase. Whatever prefix you begin with will always be lowercase. And then your name of your variable will start beginning with caps. Okay. So just capitalize the first letter of each word. Okay. So that will help you. Oh, here it is. I was looking for it. So that will help you as far as differentiating the name, and always use a name that's related to the type of value that it's going to store. All right. So as a string, so we've declared a variable for that. And then remember the information that we're taking from the text box, although it's being stored as a string, we also have to convert that value to an integer. So we're going to need a variable to hold that information as well. So now let's declare an integer variable. So we're going to begin with int. We can also call this num of bytes, but because there's a difference, it's going to be storing it as an integer. So as integer. Okay. Same thing for a cost. So DEC, cost, because it's going to be dealing with decimal. Let's say cost per byte. Notice the camel case as decimal. All right. And you would do the exact same thing with a char, CHR. Let's just say middle, initial. This is just for example's sake, just so you know that it all looks the same when you're declaring. And then Boolean, BLN, let's say is Tuesday as Boolean. So this will store true or false. Yes, today is Tuesday when I'm doing this recording, so it will store true. And if it were not, or maybe if it's a different day when you're watching it, it will be stored as false. Okay, so this is how you declare. This is declaring a variable. Sorry. This is declaring a variable. It's a little sloppy, but okay, let's just erase this so we can write that again. All right, so you can see it. So this is how you declare a variable. Okay. All right, so I would say just take a moment, read through the section with the different types of data types and the acronym or the prefix that you would use in front of it. Okay. Now, there's also one other type of variable that you can declare, but what happens is sometimes in your program you may have a value that you want to remain consistent throughout your entire program. You want it to be the same value and you're not going to change it for any reason. And that is called your constant. It's going to be a constant variable, which means it's going to constantly be the same value. All right. So the way you would declare that is COST, which is basically constant, and then you will have an underscore here. All right. And then what happens is also is when you're declaring this particular variable, you want to make sure that you're generally going to be using this at the global level, which we will discuss a little bit more about how you will set up your program to have global variables, which is basically going to be available throughout the entire region of your program. Okay. So now what we're just going to look at is how you would actually declare that particular variable and initialize. So this here is going to be an example of initialization as well, so that you'll see the difference. Remember, declaration, which we've done at the top here, this portion here, the declaration is just allocated space. Okay, so we've allocated space for this type of information, so nothing's been stored there yet. But say, for example, we wanted to actually initialize. Okay, so I'm going to make that a little smaller so we can see. So that is a declaration. So let's go ahead and do okay, I'm going to move this down a little bit so that we'll have a little bit of space. So if you wanted to initialize a variable, that means now I'm going to actually assign a value. I'm going to store a value, and we're going to use our constant as an example. So CONST, all right, constant, which is short for constant. And then what you'll do, you're going to have an underscore C. That is how you're going to begin. And that's a lowercase c, by the way. Let's do it again to make sure it looks like a lowercase c. So underscore lowercase c. And then now you're going to use the prefix that's appropriate for the type of data. So let's say we're going to store a cost here. So a lot of times if you're signing up for a subscription or you're purchasing something, most generally it's always going to have like a set price. And so that's going to be considered our constant. So whatever the cost is per bike rental, whatever you're going to pay for per bike, all right, to rent per bike. So that's going to be DEC. So DEC, because it's going to be a cost, excuse me, and then we're going to say cost per bike for the name. All right. And then now what we're going to do is continue with the as decimal. All right. And then we're going to go ahead and store. Assign. So now we're assigning $9.95 to this particular variable. All right. So anytime we want to reference $9.95, we're going to use this variable name here. Okay. So we're going to use this variable name here to reference it. But right now we have $9.95 stored in that particular variable. Okay. Now, by default, your program is going, Visual Basic is going to store it as a decimal. I mean, as a double. But because we want it to be a decimal, we want to force, because sometimes it'll automatically convert, but we don't want it to do that. So we're going to place a capital D on the end to indicate that we want it to be of type decimal. Okay. So I want to point out something here. In the slides, this is the letter that you will use, or the literal that you will use to force a particular type. So to keep your program from automatically defaulting to whatever type that it is, or it has set, you will set it up to be forced to change it. And most of the time throughout this program, you're generally going to be using it for the decimal mostly at the end of all of yours. So notice here, this example, we're putting a D on the end to make sure that it stores it as that type, because sometimes if it automatically converts to what it wants it to convert to, you can end up with some type of compiling error or a logical error or incorrect output. Okay. So keeping that in mind. All right. So now 995 is stored inside of CDEC, cost per byte. So anytime you want to use CDEC, you will actually use that name. Okay. So this is how you store, and this is how you declare, and this is how you initialize. Now I'm going to go ahead and do another initialization. And for this particular one, we're going to take what's in the text box from our text box, and we're going to store it in our string num of bytes. So let's scroll this just a little bit. All right, so we're assuming that we're in our coding window and we've already initialized our, we've already declared our variable here to store the information that the user entered. All right, so you've already learned how to create your grab your objects and add them to your form. You've learned how to name them. You know what the acronyms are as you're moving forward. And for our text box, of course, it's TXT. If you haven't watched the guided portion yet, that's what the prefix is going to be for your text box, TXT. Okay, so now we want to go ahead and store inside of string num. So we've already declared this, so we don't have to declare it again. We can just use the name that we've given it, num of bytes. And remember that it has to be exactly the same. My letters may look a little bigger because of how I'm writing on the whiteboard, but it should be exactly the same inside of your program so that it recognizes the variable that you're attempting to use. Okay, so string number of bytes, your assignment operator. So what we're wanting to do is grab whatever is in our text box. Do you guys remember how you access what's in the text property? Hopefully you do. So what we're going to do is use the name of our text box. We're just going to assume that the name of our text box is TXT num of bytes, because that's what this particular text box will hold. TXT num of bytes dot TEXT. So now it's going to access the text property of my program, the text property inside of my program, and it's going to grab whatever's there. So that means whatever number the user entered, whatever they entered in the text box, is now going to be assigned to string number of bytes. So in our slide, we saw that the user entered 4. I want 4 bytes. So now 4 is stored inside a string num of bytes, right? However, we can't use string num of bytes to calculate the cost. So what we need to do now is convert. So now we need to update this particular variable. So now we're here where we need to update the int num of bytes. All right, we've already declared it, so let's just go ahead and start typing here. Now remember, you have to declare it before you can try to use it. You can't just use it. Okay, you have to declare the variable first. All right, int number of bytes. All right, so remember that the value that the user entered here inside of string is a string. So now we need to convert that. So I have to convert that to an integer value so that I can use it to calculate how much the user will have to pay. All right, so there's a class inside of the language. So there are several different built-in classes that you can get access to that already have pre-written code that you may want to use. And you'll see that happens as we move forward. So in this particular case, we want to access the convert class of the Visual Basic language. Convert, capital C. So we're accessing this class. That's the class name. Then we're using our dot operator. In the language, it's not just recognized. It's not recognized as a period. This particular dot is an operator that's performing a task. So now it's basically going to access a procedure inside of the class. So you're creating a connection between your program and the convert class, okay? So now your program is wanting to access the convert class and is wanting to use the toInt32 procedure. So this is a procedure. All right. Now you're going to, and remember all of your procedures have an open and close parentheses. So sometimes they're empty, sometimes they pass an argument. In this case, what do you think you're going to pass as an argument? Whatever it is that you're trying to convert. So what are we trying to convert? So what will go inside of this parentheses here? If you guessed it, str, num of bytes, yes. So now I'm passing this value, whatever's stored here, I'm passing to here, and it's going to be converted. All right. So now this particular toInt32 procedure is, this is the argument pass. This particular procedure is a function procedure, which means it's going to return a value. So I'm sending it some information. I'm sending this argument, and it's going to send me back the converted type, which is going to be an integer. So now it's going to send the number 4 back as an integer. And now we're going to store that inside of our int num of bytes. So now when I'm ready to do a calculation, I am going to use int num of bytes to reference the number of bytes they want to purchase, okay? Rent. So what we're going to do is go ahead and do a full initialization and a calculation inside of one statement. But before I do that, I want to make sure that you all are familiar with all of your operators. I'm pretty sure you've seen these operators since grade school. So they work similar in the language. So the plus sign, addition, if you want to add, subtraction, multiplication, division, exponentiation, which is basically exponents, integer division, or modulus. Some of you probably have had some type of experience with some of these, but for the most part, the main ones that we'll use is addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. Remember that exponentiation is just exponents. So if you wanted to deal with exponents, you want to square or whatever it is, you would use the exponentiation operator. Modulus gets the remainder. So thinking about when you divide is generally going to return the whole number. Thinking about your division when you're using longhand division. Let's think about that back in the day. Right now, we probably use our phone, our calculators on our phone, but longhand division, and it would take the larger number, and it would truncate the remainder in this particular language. But whenever you want to keep the remainder, you would use the modulus, which will maintain that the remainder and truncate or garbage the whole number, okay? We won't use that a whole lot, but just to kind of point that out. But in this case, we're wanting to use the multiplication operator to calculate the cost of what the user will have to pay, okay? So let's come back here, and we're going to create a whole new variable. So I'm going to start over here. Dim is going to be cost, so cost. Let's call it total cost, what they're going to have to pay as decimal. So you can go ahead and do your assignment. So you can do your equal sign here. So in order for us to calculate the cost, we have to take the cost per byte and multiply it times however much the user will have to pay. So here we're going to do CDEC, which is our constant that holds the 995, right? And then we're going to use our multiplication. We're going to multiply times, remember the int norm of bytes because we've converted it to an integer, okay? So now your program is going to calculate, it's going to multiply those values for you, and whatever the result is, it will be stored inside of the decimal total cost, all right? It's going to store it inside of the decimal total cost, and then remember, anytime you want to present anything, and you will have to use labels to print them on your form. So what if I want to update and print the label? I want to print the total cost that they'll have to pay. And just to give you a visual, see here, total cost of byte. This value is going to change, right? Because everybody's not going to rent the same number of bytes. So this right here will be the total cost that you want to print after it calculates whatever you're paying or have to pay, or the user has to pay. It's going to multiply it times, it's going to multiply 995 times whatever number of bytes, and then we're going to print and present their cost there. But in order for us to do that, we have to use a label. So let's assume we've created a label, LBL, that's called total cost. And what do you remember? What do we have to use to present it, to print it? We have to use the text property. Now I want to update that text property. All right. And let's say we want to say, let's just say we want to say your cost is, and then print the cost, okay? Now, if you notice, your cost is string, it's text, okay? And then total cost, whatever the amount, is going to be the actual amount that we've calculated. Now, we have two different things here. We have a string, your cost is, we have text, your cost is, and then we have the cost per byte, the value, whatever the total cost is. In order for us to do that, we have to use something called concatenation. That means we want to join two things together. We want to join this string with this value, with this cost, okay? So this is what we're gonna do. Let's go ahead and say, and remember, strings generally store using quotation marks, okay? So your cost is, and we're just gonna say colon and leave a little space here because remember, whatever's inside of these quotation marks is gonna be printed, okay? And then the concatenation symbol, okay, that looks weird. So the ampersand is your concatenation symbol in this language. It looks a little weird, but that's the concatenation. So you're telling it to print your cost is, and then you also want to join it with the total cost. Now, what holds our total cost? Yes, decimal total cost. But the kicker is you can't just leave that there by itself. It's not going to print it on the screen, on the form. You have to use the procedure .toString, which means it's basically going to convert it to a string for you. And then inside of here, you have to tell it how you want it to be printed. So as an argument, you pass here what you want to be printed as, and in this case it's cost, so we want it to be printed as currency. We want it to be printed with a $sign. And I'm gonna go back here in our slides here so that you can see that there are different formats that you can use. So you can have it as a general, which will just display it as a number. You can have currency, which is where we want to do when it's going to have a $sign. And by default, it has two decimal places here. Fixed, if you want to just print the number and have the fixed decimal places, but not have all the commas and all those things like that. And then number, how you can have the comma is going to basically separate it and make it look like an actual number the way you want to make it look appropriate. Percent, if you want to include a percentage or percent sign with it. And then scientific when you're looking at like the notation and all of that. Okay, but in most cases for this particular course you'll be using fixed, currency, and number, and sometimes maybe percent. Okay, so notice toString is what, and then what you pass as an argument. So for a general you would pass your G here. For your currency, you're going to pass C here for fixed, F, and so forth. All right, so for this particular case, we're going to pass a C. And then by default, it's going to print it, the cost with 2 decimal places. Now, something else to keep in mind too, you can also indicate how many decimal places, and that's for the fixed and the currency. So let's erase this. You can also do this. C2, I want 2 decimal places. Or C1, only one decimal place. Or C3, I want 3 decimal places. Okay, so you can do that as well. But it'll automatically, with just the C, it'll automatically default to 2 decimal places. Okay, so you just decide what looks appropriate for whatever program you're writing. Okay. All right, so hopefully you all have had a good idea. You have a good idea of what we're creating here. And although it's the end of the video, I really want to make sure that I include something similar to the constant, how we initialize the constant. So if you wanted to initialize any of the others, I'm sorry, the equal sign, I'm just going to do number of bytes text. Okay. So if you wanted to, just so it doesn't confuse you, let's just clear this out. I don't want you to, okay. So we've cleared that out, and just in general, I just want to go through, let's just say name, okay, just to do something different so you can see, you can store whatever you want. So I'm going to say Kimberly Davis. All right. And then you want to store maybe the year. All right, as into this is how you go ahead and initialize. You can also go ahead and initialize on one line. You don't have to always have it separate, but in most cases, because you don't know what information the user is going to enter, you will be just declaring and initializing later. Okay. And then decimal, let's say GPA as decimal. 3.5, okay. And then say you have a char, CHR, let's say middle as char. Now with the char uses double quotation marks. For those that have taken Java, you probably used to seeing single quotes, but in this language, chars use double quotation marks. Okay, and we've already done a Boolean one. So this is an example of initializing. Notice the numbers here, the values. You will not use any quotations or anything like that, though. They're just going to be those set values. And anytime you want to reference year, you will use int year. Anytime you want to reference 3.50, your GPA, you're going to use decimal GPA. Okay. Now, that concludes the variables and arithmetic operations for chapter 4. Please take a moment and read through your chapter in the textbook, and then review the guided portion of the program at the end of the chapter to get a little more in depth. Okay. Let me know if you all have questions. Good luck, and I'll see you guys in the next video.